Welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining in and tuning in. We have here today another guest, Heidi Rokati. How's it going, Heidi?
I'm doing well. How are you on it?
Doing very well, thank you. I've now known Heidi for almost 7 or 8 years now, and it seems like I've known her for a lifetime. And I only say that is because we align a lot on where we are in life. We're kind of going through the same cycle in life as well, being new parents as well as getting married fairly recently. But it's been a blessing to know Heidi and all the joy and happiness that she brings every time we hang out. Thank you and welcome again, Heidi. So what's going on? What's been new with you recently?
We have a 2-year-old and we're also expecting our second baby, so we're very excited about that. And just keeping up with a toddler and working. I'm a counselor, so I work primarily with teenagers right now, but also counsel adults as well, which is what I prefer. And that's kind of what we've been doing, just living life.
Well, that's good to hear. In our last conversation, so we had Danielle, and we talked about what it is to have a complete nuclear family. And in that conversation, as you guys heard, we've kind of touched on the importance of biblical roles for a husband and a wife, and what honoring a biblical marriage looks like. And this conversation this afternoon, we're going to be talking a little bit more in depth about what it means to honor a biblical marriage. So FFCNation, we believe, one of our beliefs is fundamental, right? That husbands are called to lead their families, and they're called to lead with selfless love. They're called to lead with compassion. And wives, per the Bible, are expected to, honor, support their husbands. And as a wife, how do you emulate that kind of love in a marriage? And how do you kind of honor and support your husband? Just wanted to expand on that a little bit.
Sure. That's a very loaded question on it. How do I honor and support my husband? I think one of the biggest things that's important to me, and I think my husband's name is Johnson would agree, is just supporting him. And that can sometimes be hard because sometimes our ideas are different, which is pretty common, but also not only do we have, a difference of opinions because we're different people, but also because we're from different cultures. And he grew up in India until he was 25, and I grew up in America. So it's sometimes hard, but I just think a lot of times I have to kind of slow myself down and be like, okay, what is he saying? What is he seeing? He's very good at looking long term, and I am not. So being able to trust what he's saying in his opinion. And I think that helps him just know, like I sometimes feel like if I can believe in him and I trust in him, he can conquer the world.
Right.
And so, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I hear you, right? And I think it also, like, there's this importance that I think Christ also calls husbands to reflect their devotion to him, right? It's important that the husband should also ensure that they're honoring God, right, through their decisions that they're making, whether that be long term, short term, like also understanding what the will of God is for them and for their family.
Totally, yes. I've seen that in our own family. Just even, I feel like Johnson has really grown in his faith in the last probably year or two, and just that maturing in faith in some ways. Not that he wasn't mature before, but just I feel like he's kind of taken on that role of like, oh yes, like I am, now that we have a son and our son copies every single thing he does, and then he has me that he's also called to take care of, and now another baby on the way. He's like, I have to get myself in order. I have to make sure that I'm following God the way that I need to. And so, we've had our times where we're really good at like praying together, reading the Bible together, and other times where we're not. And usually in the beginning of our marriage, I was not always the one that would take the lead in that, but like more often now he's like, okay, like we need to pray, or we need, even if we're upset with each other, we need to pray together. And, that really means a lot to me because I didn't have that leadership per se in my life growing up. So just to see him taking on that role, especially as our kids are now going to be looking up to him um, as
Role
that,
model.
yes, thank you, role
Right,
model. And
right.
not, I didn't have a strong, I mean, my dad was a Christian, but he wasn't one to model prayer or devotion time or serving God in that way. And so to see Johnson kind of step into roles at church, to step into roles where he prays with our son or with us as a family or with, just me, has been really neat to see that. And easier, I think, for me too, to follow him because I'm like, okay, like if he is following God,
Yeah.
if I know that he's in tune to God, sometimes more than I am because being a mom is all consuming. And so sometimes
I'm
it's
sure.
hard for me to connect with God. But I think sometimes, not that he fills in that gap because it's still my responsibility to connect with God myself, but he helps me kind of stand fast and be like, oh, okay, like I need to remember that this is important, or at least like I'm praying with him if I don't get my own individual time. And
Right.
just even just hearing his prayers for me can be a way that I can trust him easier because
Right.
it allows you to see into his heart and like more of like what he's
Yeah.
thinking. I think when we talk to God, it's more of who we are at the core instead of just sometimes what we show on the outside because you know when you're married, as you know, you see the worst and the best. So
Sure. Sure. So I want to tap into that a little bit, right? So how do you keep um or I guess that's how do you ensure that, when a partner, right, is not necessarily meeting that quote unquote expectation, and I don't, it's a strong word, I don't want to use that again, but
sure.
I can't just find another word for it. But how do we keep them accountable, to ensure that, they're following that path that's been laid out for them?
Sure. I think when you're married to someone, you kind of get to know who they really are and what God has called them to.
Mm,
And so, there have been times, and for both Johnson and I, where we have struggled with either our careers or with what our goals are or what we want. And, that's something that we shared early on in our relationship. So, sometimes it's like I have to remind him, okay, like this is going to happen for you. And like God has been faithful and reminding him of that faithfulness in the past. And for him, to me, it's like he just encourages me a lot of like um, reminding me what my goals are or why what I'm doing is important. And yeah, so I think that's part of it. It's just like knowing who that person is at the core and what they love and what they're passionate about. And that changes, but also being in tune
yeah.
to that. That's why, like, yes, prayer is definitely important. Bible reading together is important. Church is important. Serving is important, but like also spending the intentional time together.
Right.
I mean, prayer is intentional time, but you know what I mean? Like intentional time where it's like you're spending time together, shopping or just talking and having
Yeah.
conversations. Because my desires have changed since becoming a mom. Like work is not nearly as important to me as it used to be,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I know I still have that goal. And one day my son is going to be out of the house and my future child is going to be out of the house. And what am I going to have? Like I have to kind of, you know, being a mother is definitely, and a wife is the most important role I can fulfill right now. But I also have a calling that God has given me outside of that.
Mm,
And so I think John does a really good job of reminding me, like, hey, you did all this work to get to where you're at. And
right.
that's important to maintain, even if it's not as much as maybe it will be in the future.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think just like reminding them where God has called them to and reminding them of God's faithfulness, I think has been really important in our marriage. Of just like when I stress out, when he stresses out, like, hey, God's going to take care of it.
Yeah.
And it might not be how we want it necessarily, but he has it under control and we don't need to be concerned about this.
Yeah. To kind of put that into terms in my head, it's kind of sounding like just open dialogue and communication,
Mm-hmm.
right? Really kind of getting down to the brass tacks and trying to figure out, hey, I perhaps feel, maybe we're distancing a little bit in relation to our own relationship. in relationship to the word and into kind of spending quality time together. Spending that time, together is enabling you to actually ultimately fulfill the will of God that you have on your life.
Hmm.
And it's a good conversation to have. Now, do you guys generally, like, how do you know, right? Like, how do you feel when that pull is perhaps away from, you know, what you're, when you're going through your day-to-day life?
Sure. So we've had kind of an unconventional life since being married. Um, Both of us have gone through our times where we haven't had a job, or some of the time we both work remotely, and I think there was like 6 months where we both worked at the same job. So we've had opportunities where we've spent a lot of time together, but we've also had months, possibly a year or so, where we weren't always together at the same time,
Yeah.
especially when we were
Yeah.
dating. Um,
Right.
and so I think it can be harder for us when we're not in the same place because we're so used
Mm.
to living life together. Like, as I was saying earlier, on it's like we were gonna go. Jackson really wanted me to go to the store with him. I was like, okay, well, I got dinner to cook, I got a child to bathe, I got to get him to bed. Like, and going to the store right now is going to make bedtime later, and then crank your child. And so we are so used to spending a lot of our time together that I think I think it's like more if one of us is more stressed out, we tend to kind of distance ourselves, and it can be easier. Like, oh, we're stressed. We don't want to be. Maybe even we don't want to trigger the other person. We don't want to make the other
Yeah.
person upset because we know we're cranky or upset, and like we might just flip our switch at the slightest thing. And so I think sometimes it's just asking, like, "Hey, are you okay?" or "What's going on?" And I think we have to be more intentional when we're not together, of
Mm.
just, making sure we're talking on the phone, or spending time together and through the phone, I guess, or FaceTime. And if we're like all together all the time and we're really feeling that distance, I guess, I think it's just like being intentional with each other. I think we've
Yeah.
been pretty good with that. Like last night, we don't go on dates a lot because we just don't, and we always
It's
have our son
life.
with us.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's life. But last night we did simple like shopping and going out for Indian chai and
Nice.
well, bonda, which is an Indian breakfast food,
Yeah.
and like that felt like a date to me. I was like, thank you,
Yeah.
Johnson. Like,
The small things.
thank you for taking the time, like, for us to go out and like spend time together, and that's not just sitting in the house and doing work or taking care of our kids. Like, you know, really being able to like be intentional with our son, with each other. And, we love spending time together, but sometimes it can just feel very
Yeah. Yeah.
ritualistic,
Routine.
I guess. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
routine.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, and like when I think those kind of times for me are really important because I'm definitely a quality time person. For him, it's like doing things for him. And um, today he was working in the basement. Like me, I couldn't do a lot because I'm like 5 months pregnant. So really,
Right.
just like being there with him makes him feel like, oh, okay, like I'm there, I'm supporting him.
Right. Right.
So finding those ways, like being in tune to what the other person needs, and again, like who they are as a person, like how do they feel loved? And that's
Right.
kind of
Right. So
being
recognizing
counseling.
those. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, recognizing those and understanding those patterns as you live together. Heidi, I'm curious, right? So growing up here, right, there's different ways that generally Americans show love, right? I mean, it's broken down into science. There's 5 different topics, right? Like acts of service, physical touch, yada yada. My point being, in loving someone that's from a different culture and the way that they kind of show love back or how they display that type of love, understanding that you guys are obviously founded in faith and you know
Hmm.
what it is to be biblical. Were there challenges that you saw initially through your dating phase and that you had to kind of learn as you understood each other, and what kind of resonated with you on how to provide love, or were there any challenges that you faced that you can kind of share?
Well,
Well, not even
dating,
challenges, right? Just
yeah, sure.
happy things, thoughts too, you know?
Dating an Indian who is, I don't know about you and Danny, but straight from India,
Yeah.
uh, was very not what I expected. Um, just because uh, Indians, when they date, they don't tell anyone, first of all, until they know for sure that it's gonna
Right.
be, you know, it's gonna stick. And they don't show any physical affection in public. For me, it wasn't a huge thing because I'm not a huge touch person, anyways. But um, a funny story is like one time we were out at a place near my house, and it was like we were dating for maybe a month,
Hmm.
and all of a sudden Johnson disappears, completely disappears. Like I had no, and we were in this crowded place. Like I know you're from farther north in Maryland, but it's a place called North. Oh my gosh, National Harbor, and it's pretty crowded. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm just like, what in the heck happened to this guy? We were holding hands, even like it just like he just disappeared into thin air. And so then he
Rapture.
like,
I'm kidding.
yeah, then he randomly comes back, and I was like, where in the heck were you? And he was like, he kind of like played it off, and I was like, okay, this is weird. I don't know what to think about this. And then it happened again, and I was just like, what in the heck? Like, why does he keep on disappearing? Well, then he eventually told me, like, when he felt it was safe because he didn't see any threats around, that his pastor's daughter was there on her bachelorette party, and he did not want his pastor's daughter to see him. One, because people knew about us at his church, but they did not know we were dating. His parents
Mm.
were in town. It just,
And the word shouldn't get around, right?
yes, the word should not get
Yeah.
around. But as an American, my mom had known about this guy from the get-go. My sister was there when I went my first date. Like, she encouraged me, even though I kind of wanted her to come with me because I was nervous. And
Yeah.
she's like, no, you gotta go, you gotta go. And so, like, it was just like my whole family knew. My best friend knew, And I think when we started dating, the only one that knew was you.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, that's fair.
so I was like, I just felt like that was really, so that was a challenge for me, just like recognizing that part of his culture and not thinking something was wrong with him or wrong
Right,
with me that he didn't
right,
want to tell me. Because, in our culture, in American culture, it's like, well, they're not telling you. They might be like a pedophile or like, who knows, some
yeah,
murderer or
yeah,
something,
yeah,
like, why
yeah. It's
aren't they
definitely sketchy.
introducing? Yeah, it's
Right.
sketchy. And so just understanding that part of his life, and then just like, I think his dedication to his parents was something else that I had to kind of come to terms with. And not that it's a bad thing, it just was a lot more dedication than
Collective
maybe
nature
I
that we
would.
grew up in. Right,
Right, right.
right, right.
Whereas we're much more, in America, we're much more independent. And like I love my mom, was super close to her, but I don't need to submit to her every will and call.
Sure.
And so I think, especially before we got married, that was when, and his parents were visiting, that was kind of, and he still made a lot of time for me as well, but it was just a different feeling. And that too, like not being able to meet his parents as his girlfriend because he wasn't ready for that or he didn't know if it was sick, whatever, was just very different for me. And being able to trust, like, okay, like, I guess this is normal.
Yeah.
uh I think it took a while until I met people that were from his culture, you and another friend that was like, yeah, like that's normal, like don't take offense to that, whatever. And I was like, okay, okay. Uh, and I think just that, also just, I don't know if it's his, well, I think it's Indians in general, at least in India. I don't want to speak for you, so
Sure, sure.
uh,
I'll correct you if you.
are not super affectionate, like as men
Mm,
especially.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
I think that was something, and I didn't grow up with a dad who was very affectionate, but I have, my family is, like, my parents divorced when I was young, but I have a stepdad as well. My stepdad was pretty affectionate to my mom. So, and my grandpa was affectionate to my grandma. So I had kind of like a mixed example there, I guess you could
Mm,
say. And so, like, there have been times where that has been kind of a challenge of like, he just doesn't show affection as far as like he's not gonna come and hug me or kiss me or
Right. Right.
out of the blue usually. Not that he
Sure.
doesn't, because he does, but like, or saying I love you is more difficult for him. And just accepting, like, that's how he grew up, that's how his culture is. It doesn't mean that he doesn't love me. I don't necessarily need to hear those words from his mouth because
Mm,
he shows it
mm,
in other ways. And
right.
he shows love more of acts of service and doing things and making sure I'm safe and
Right.
more
Right.
so than like being all frilly with his words or
Sure.
whatever, or his action
Sure.
or his
Sure.
physical action. So like I think that was an adjustment in some ways as well, and just like understanding where his culture was kind of different in that. I think that was helpful seeing, as I got more exposed to Indian culture by either watching movies or um, going to India and seeing that kind of helped me understand him a lot better as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very true. I think from my observation, right? Like obviously I grew up here, so I see this I see two sides of the coin, right? So I'm
Mm-hmm.
able to understand that, well, growing up here, I'm aware of the cultural norms and everything as such, but obviously there was some detail that I still retained from my culture. So like
Mm-hmm.
trying to balance that was the real difficult part for me, where I know what the other person's actually expecting, right? Because I'm part
Right.
of that same culture and I probably also have some tendencies to want that, back.
Mm-hmm.
But then having that like tug in my heart, like someone might be looking out.
Yeah.
Are you sure you should be doing this from your upbringing,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps? Right. So safe to say, I still kind of lean towards more of my American side with when I was dating my wife. But it was an interesting period, especially because I know Johnson had reached out to me and let me know that this was happening, and had kind of introduced him to that dating app, which you guys eventually met on. So it was an interesting conversation his mom had with me, but I digress.
We were
um,
just recalling that the other day.
yeah, yeah, that was a very interesting conversation she had with me. I'm curious, when you visited India, um, the whole collective aspect of the culture that is there, to the individual aspect that you grew up with. Um, how did you receive love and from? Because I guess the reason why I'm going through that is because in the family structure that we come from, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have an attachment to the extended family as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they themselves also feel that, you're part of that unit, and they show love and they receive love the same way, or expect to at least. But given that, you are from an entirely different background, I'm curious to know, how was that for you through that experience? Did you find that challenging? Were there areas where you felt perhaps, man, I just didn't think it would be like this? Or were there areas that kind of surprised you and you were like, oh wow, this is really unique and I wish I kind of had more of that?
Do you mean extended family as far as us being the India, like me and Johnson being family, and then like extended family being parents, siblings, or like
Right.
cousins, grandma? Okay,
Yeah, yeah. All of the above.
sure. Okay. I think part of me knew, obviously, Johnson speaks to his family quite frequently. And so part of me picked up on that from phone calls and things like that. So both times I've gone to India, I've been twice, once for my brother-in-law's wedding, and then the second one was for my son's first birthday. And so both of them were for big events. And if you don't know anything about Indian culture, these events are like Hollywood weddings, like birthday party, prayer meeting, or not prayer meeting, but like Thanksgiving function or wedding, or it doesn't matter. It's all like a Hollywood wedding. It's crazy. That is not how I grew up as far as events go. We were more like the potluck type church, or like, simple pizza for dinner type birthday parties, things like that. So they're very stressful. And Indian events don't get planned until the last minute. So I think just like that, I always tell my husband, I was like, can we just go when there isn't an event? Because I just want to enjoy India. Like, I just want to
Mm.
be able to like get to know your family when they're not super stressed and, you know, like enjoy it. And so like that was, I say that all to because that kind of makes a huge difference in my experience in India because there was this huge event that was going on. That's why we went. And so the first time we went was for my brother-in-law's wedding. And in India, they go and hand deliver invitations to each person. And first of all, from an American perspective, I'm like, you have WhatsApp, you got email, you got the post mail or post office. In India, it's called the post. But and so I was like, why are you spending all this time going to each individual's house? And Johnson didn't take me for most of them because one, he didn't want me to feel uncomfortable being in like this super Indian environment all day. I was pregnant with my first son at the time, so like that was just a lot to begin with, and traveling on the bumpy roads, all of that, and then just they always force you to eat food. So just the combination of everything. Like I went to a few places, but John was like, just stay home. And I also was in school and internship, all that. So he was gone though, like sometimes from like afternoon to evening. And so like that was hard for me too because it was like he felt this loyalty to his mom, which I respected, but also here I am, don't know anything in India
Yeah.
and like stuck in this apartment, and he doesn't live in a place where I can just go and get stuff. And he was always very good to make sure I had what I needed. But he's like, just ask my brother. And I'm like, and I don't know your brother. I don't feel comfortable asking, you know, and like that's kind of like that whole like um they consider everything everyone, they don't mind asking for help, all of that. And so for me, I'm like, I can't ask him for to go get me samosas. Like
Yeah.
that's so rude, and that too, I don't have money to give him, so he's going to pay for it. Like I can't do that. And Johnson's like, Heidi, that's what we do. Like it's okay. Like he won't mind. Just ask him. I did. Johnson called him
Good.
and asked him to go get me food, but you know, like for China, his brother, you know, he didn't think anything of it. Like it was like an
Hmm.
honor for him to go and get me food.
Right.
And, you know, like it just that, well, and Johnson's the oldest too. So in that culture, he's basically like a parent in that culture. And Indian culture is pretty much like he's a parent, right? And so I know you're the oldest as well, but, and so it's just the loyalty that his siblings have to him and the respect was very something I appreciated. That wasn't something that was necessarily hard. It was just like sometimes I was like, you can't treat him not in a bad way, but you can't expect that of him, or you can't
Sure.
expect that of your brother or your sister. Like that's like, you know, it's not your place.
Yeah.
But for him, it is his place.
Yeah.
And you know, I grew up with a sister who's 11 years younger than me, but that was not how our relationship ran. And so it was just like that was something I thought was so cool, like how, and he's the oldest of cousins too. So like all of his cousins, which in India they're pretty much brothers and sisters,
Hmm.
respect him like that. And so that was really cool to see, but also helped me understand that's why he gets offended sometimes what to how someone here that's younger than him might treat him because
Mm.
he's used to like, hey, like when you have someone that's older than you respect them because they're older than you. It doesn't matter
Right.
like, you know, how they treat you. And I think when they were so when his parents first came, I met them as his friend. We were dating, but as his friend, and his dad doesn't walk very well. So seeing how Johnson took care of his dad, how
Right.
he took care of his mom, that was I think that was one thing that made me fall in love with him because it was like, huh, like if
Mm.
he takes care of his parents this way, then he's going to take care of his wife this way.
And that's
And if
beautiful
he,
that you bring that up, because in the Bible, not to cut you off, but it says honor your mother and father, right? And kind of showing that type of care and affection that he is providing to his
mm-hmm,
parents. I think you're saying, which before I interrupted, was that it translates down to the wife, and
right,
that shows the type of tender care that he might have,
mm-hmm,
and what really you're called as a husband to do, right? Be
right,
selfless. And I think that's kind of what you're hitting at.
yeah,
Is he was very selfless, knowing and understanding the needs and wants, and um, perhaps the expectations that are put on him.
mm-hmm,
Right, to your point
yeah,
about when you're the elder of a community or within that family, excuse me, that there is this expectation put onto you that you didn't really ask for, right? But that does
100%,
come with the role and responsibility. And obviously, cultures are different, right? To your point, when the collective aspect, that I guess what I'm trying to go is that love is shown in that way through respect, through
mm-hmm,
understanding the roles, understanding the defined structure and the order that's kind of put in place, and how to ensure that love cascades down through all those different layers.
right,
Where and it's unfortunate that in the country that we live in sometimes, and I don't mean it in a slight, and I do, trust me, love America, right? That independence sometimes puts I over us
yeah,
at the forefront, and I think there's a lot of change and turning of minds that I believe, don't get me wrong, independence is great, right? Like there's a lot of value you get from it, that you're able to chart and set your own course, but it takes away when you kind of turn in a way that is not for the value of togetherness. And even in the
right,
Bible, right, we understand there's like defined roles that every specific relationship has. What parents to children, right? Children's to parents,
mm-hmm.
and husbands to wives, like we've been talking about. So kind of just understanding that dynamic. And I think your husband, to your point, has been, seems like doing a really great job on that. One question that I wanted to follow up with, um, how do you both work through areas where perhaps you feel that your child that you're raising together, right, is able to also understand and really value the same, I guess, the upbringing perhaps that you had and what Johnson had, and ensuring that they get the best of both of those
Both
together.
of us,
Um, because obviously, being a blended child, there's positives and negatives from every
sure,
side that you have to factor in. Um,
mm-hmm.
as you kind of understand your role through the biblical lens, how do you ensure that gets, sent, or how do you ensure that it's transpired to your child as well?
I think one thing that I've been thinking about and trying to work on most recently is not overseeing what Johnson says. Like, what is his, if he tells Zeke not to do something? I'm not always perfect at it because I don't always understand Johnson's reasoning. Again, back to like, I could be better at that. But our son is already, if one of us says no, he'll go to the other parent or
Mm,
the grandparent or whoever is there. And so sometimes it's just communicating, like I might not realize that Johnson already said no. But I think that having our son respect his dad and his rules or guidelines is really important to me and mine too. But I really want us to be a unit. So I don't want him to see, like, as I mentioned, I grew up in a diverse family. That wasn't something that was normal for me. And
yeah.
so I would love for our kids to recognize that, like, we are a unit and you can't
Mm.
go against one of us and hope to get pity on the other. So that's one thing that we really try hard to just kind of be a unified structure. Um, I want to set that example for our son so that when he goes to get married one day,
Yeah.
hopefully in the very far future, um, that he will recognize that and remember that and be like, okay, like when we do have kids, we are a team. And I think that's something that's been really important to me. And just as far as cultures, it's hard because we live in America. So like Zeke is bombarded by American culture.
Right.
So, we do go to a Telugu church part of the time. And so he does get some of the Indian culture there. Um, Sometimes Johnson eats Indian food all the time, but primarily I'm the one that feeds Zeke. And so, just trying to like give Johnson the option, like, hey, like, can Zeke have what you have, or do you want me to make sure he has something to eat? And I eat Indian food too, but this baby does not like Indian food, so that's been rough. Uh, and so just food is huge in the Indian culture, and we've always given Zeke Indian food since he could handle like the littlest bit of spice. And so, he loves pretty much anything that we've like, any fruit, any sweet that we've given him. Sometimes curries are a little bit more difficult, but he's getting there. Like, so that's like one thing for us. Like, I really want him to love Indian food. One, because if we go there, it'll be a lot easier. Two, because his dad loves it, and I want him to be able to relate to his dad on that.
Sure.
I think just like one thing I've been thinking about recently is like we are having another child, and like in American culture, that respect between the oldest and youngest child is not really there.
Yeah.
And so, but I see how Johnson is treated by his siblings and how he treats them in a positive way. And I'm wondering, like, how is Johnson going to expect our son and our future child to interact and like
Right.
what's that respect going to look like for him? And I was just like, we haven't talked about it because I was thinking about it, but I feel like that's a conversation that we do need to have, because it's like, okay, like what my idea of a sibling relationship is going to look like for them is probably very different from yours.
Right. Right.
And, like, do you expect our child to call him Anna all the time? And is that like something that is 100% yes, that has to happen? Or
And Anna
can
for our
they call?
listeners is just
Oh,
elder
yes.
brother in our language in Telugu. But go ahead.
Yes, sorry. So, yeah, just like what does that respect look like in this culture? And how do we teach them that respect? And like just not even that, but like Zeke taking care of his younger sibling and how Johnson takes care of his. And how does that look like? And Zeke is the eldest. So what does that look like for him as far as being a part of this family, and what responsibility is that going to have on him? Because,
Right.
I'm really careful with, I don't want him to feel like he's responsible for his siblings in the way of like, um, that's his job. It's our job to raise this other child, right?
Right. Right.
But also, if they're out somewhere, I want Zeke to have responsibility to take care of their younger sibling in that way. Like if we're not around or they're at school or whatever it is. So I think that's one thing too, is just like that respect, how that relationship dynamic's going to work. And it's like an interesting question. I think.
Well, I mean, the reason I'm asking that, right? Because I want to go back to the topic of just submission and marriage and what it means in a marriage, right? So, like, if you were to, you know, give advice, right, to listeners who are perhaps thinking about getting into a serious relationship or looking for a potential partner down the road, um, or just wanting to learn a little bit more, like what would you tell them, being that we live in this American culture now that you've kind of had this experience of not only being going through dating, getting married, being a believer in Christ, and putting all these facets together? What advice would you give to someone listening in, and suggest related to this what is to honor um, your husband and be submissive as a wife, as it says? It's negative connotation, but I just want to make sure that
Right.
you clarify that for our listeners.
So as far as submission, I don't believe, and I don't think you do either, that, I need to wait on Johnson hand and foot. I think it is more about us being a team and communicating as sometimes, yes, I do think that I need to kind of step back and let him be able to take the leadership. And, I think as women, sometimes we have our ideas, we like to plan and we like to know things. Because always says, like, I tell you one thing and you jump like 5,000 feet ahead and like you're planning. And I'm like, well, I have to, especially now with kids. Like, I have to
Yeah.
plan that way. But I think, and sometimes I just need to take a step back and be like, okay, like Johnson has this under control, and I just need to trust what he's saying and like listen to him. I don't always do the greatest job at letting him tell me what he's thinking, and so I've been working on that as he's transitioning and finding a new job and things like that. Like, what I don't always need to jump ahead of him. I need to. This is his. Yes, it affects all of us,
Right.
but this is his career, and I need to be able to listen to what he's saying because he knows what he's doing. And his utmost concern is taking care of our family. So trusting in him and trusting that kind of the whole thing, like before I got married, I'm still independent, but I was very independent. Didn't want to have to rely on a guy and didn't know if I could trust the guy.
Yeah.
And so I heard this probably from a book I was reading or something. It's like, you trust your husband as he trusts God, as God leads him. And I think that's something that, as I mentioned, like I feel like Johnson's been just growing his faith a lot in the last couple of years, and just that makes it easier for me to trust him and trust that God's leading him.
Amen.
And God
Yeah.
has called me to trust him as he leads, as God leads him and leads our family.
Yeah. So, like,
And
from what
so,
I'm interpreting, and you
sure.
can finish your thought, but what I'm interpreting is not getting ahead of what God's will is, not getting ahead of God's will for your husband is really understanding and staying within the lane that you've kind of established as a couple, and ensuring that the framework of what the word has set and been provided to, and trust that that is being played out in your life as you build and cultivate your own relationship with Christ and in faith. Yeah. So I think you were saying something before I cut you off. Sorry about that.
So I think the other thing that I would advise is just like working as a team. I think that Scott and Jackson and I are pretty far, and like when you ask me how we want to raise our kids in like both cultures, I'm almost like, well, how, like I don't know, because we've been married for almost 5.5 years now, and so it's like we've kind of created our own family culture.
Yeah.
And there are times where we kind of recognize the American part sometimes and the Indian part other times, and we have to work more to recognize the Indian part, that I think, because we do live in America. But like, I'm trying to be better about, allowing Johnson, that's a bad word, but like listening and respecting him and wanting to show his kids part of his culture. And what does that look like? And what does it look like in this culture when we're living in America, to show them Indian culture? And like he listens to all Telugu music, which is his native language. He watches a lot of, well, not very recently, but he has watched a lot of Telugu movies, things like that. And so like he stays very connected to his culture. He talks to his family all the time, his friends, whatever. And so our kid sees that. He speaks primarily Telugu to our son. So I think that's a big part that we keep Indian culture in our family.
I'm doing a terrible job at that. I will tell you that. I am not giving my son a good upbringing because I am definitely not speaking Telugu as I should be. I'm getting bad at it myself.
Well, and like, I think for you too, like it's like different because you grew up here, and like you do speak it to your family. It's, Johnson never. I feel like he never got out of that part of his culture completely. Like, only person he usually speaks English to is me and like who he works with or whatever, and my family. And so, and obviously people at the store, whatever it is. But and so like he's great at it. Like, I will toot his horn because I don't know how he does it, because he will literally speak to Zeke in Telugu and then turn to me and speak in English. And I'm just like, how? And Zeke doesn't speak it yet, but he understands it. And so that's a big part that we both felt like was important. I mean, bilingual kids are super smart, first of all. Like, it's good for their brain, it's good for their learning. So that's some of my background is English, teaching English, all of that. And so I did a lot of study with bilingualism, what that means for kids. And so I was all gung for it. And like, I wanted him to learn Telugu. Also, because it's important to speak to his grandparents
Sure,
in India.
sure.
And I wanted him to have a relationship with that. I think that's another part, how we keep him connected to India is by speaking to, his babai, which is uncle, speaking to his grandparents, his nani and tata, um, and it's hard, I think, for him as a 2-year-old because he doesn't remember seeing them or meeting them, and so
Yeah, yeah.
we're trying our best to like connect him to them and like getting them interested in what he's interested in and helping him kind of understand that better. And I mean, thank God we live in a world where there is FaceTime, and I used to live overseas and Skype was awful and like hardly worked. And so, like we can connect with our loved ones across the world like in a second flat. Like, how amazing is that? So just yeah, so that and like just really exposing him. Like, we go to a Telugu church, like we always tell people, don't speak English to them, speak Telugu. Um
So, Heidi, a couple thoughts come to mind as you're kind of sharing a little bit of your experience. you know, you mentioned that you're kind of framing your own culture within your own family of
mhm,
what that looks like. But obviously, like there is, you kind of touched on this about external influence as well that kind of comes through with extended family, your community, etc. I'm curious, like as you're, building this foundation and building this um, environment for yourself, how are you guys making sure, or do you guys ensure that there are certain boundaries that you're setting, right, to ensure that there are um, you know nothing that you perhaps don't see fit for your own culture that you're
mhm.
learning, or excuse me, working towards, um, doesn't get infiltrated? And what are some of those boundaries perhaps that you've set that enable you to continue to honor and support your husband, and him as your wife, or excuse me, he as you're his wife,
Sure.
do that for your family?
Yeah, so that's something that we are always thinking about and always trying to figure out because, like right now, primarily influences our family and close friends for our son, for our family. So I think a lot of it's just, yes, it's Indian American culture, but a lot of it's our Christian faith. And like,
Mm-hmm.
we don't want certain talk around our son. We don't want people spreading around our son. We don't want our child exposed to certain movies or music. And so, like sometimes I've had to talk with family members and be like, hey, like, can you not talk about it when around Zeke? And I think something that's important to me is just like arguing. Like, I do not want people, whether it's my husband and I, whether it's me with my family or him with his family, arguing around Zeke. Like, that was a huge trauma point in my life. Um, I don't want him to ever grow up like he has to be afraid of someone because of what he heard or what he felt during that experience. And so that's something else that I've kind of set as a boundary and asked Jonathan to respect it. Um, I think another is just the importance of family, making sure that, as I mentioned, like he's connected with his family in India, he's connected with here, and it doesn't always work like we want it to, but we're trying. And just raising him to know and love God. And I think like that's what we want um, our home to emulate, what we want the, like, even whether it's our kids or whether it's family or whether it's friends walking in our house and know, like, just feel peace, to feel like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
this is a place that we can come and unload. This is a place where we can come and relax and to just um not feel strife or feel like we're uncomfortable or that we're not welcome. But like the Rokati house is or rockety as you say it, is one that emulates that love, that peace that God gives.
Mm,
And I think that's really important for us as we raise our kids. And, you know, there are boundaries of the, or just like world things, like things that I work in primarily in schools right now, and things that I'm seeing in the schools that I'm like, how do I raise a kid in this?
yeah,
Because I don't want my child exposed to this, but I don't want my child so sheltered that when they do turn 18 and they go into the world that they don't know how to live in the world.
right,
And
right.
you probably have heard this quote, but basically it's like God has brought this child into this world to be raised at a time such as this. And,
Mm,
you know, Zeke being born right now, this child that's inside me being born in a couple of months, that's no surprise or shock to God. And
right.
he knows, like, okay, like, this is what the world is looking like right now. And it's looking pretty messy. But, you know, our children are going to be equipped with the skills they need to be raised in that. And that's partly our responsibility. Well, God has given us that responsibility. Obviously,
Right.
God has a hand in that as well. But, like, I want to equip my children to be light of the world. I mean, we have prayed since before Zeke was even born that people will see him and feel God's light, and like that he will just be a
Yeah.
light to others. And
And to be the salt of the world, right?
right. And
Right, right.
so, you know, like as our kids grow, I think those boundaries are gonna be more like about what they're watching, what they're I said that, but even more so, and just who we allow into our lives. Like I don't there are certain people that I have to be careful about my son spending time with.
Mm,
And um and I think that's normal no matter who you are, what culture you're from, but what kind of influences are is my son being that what is he around? And
sure, sure.
um so, you know, like it just boundaries is hard. I'm very bad at being confrontational. And so it's always a struggle for me. And I think like it kind of ebbs and flows on what those are. And you know, I've had situations where people have had to gain back my trust to be around my son,
Mm,
and I think that's okay. I don't think we
sure.
don't have to allow everyone to be in our children's lives because
Yeah,
they're family or because
yeah.
they're close friends. Like if they're not exhibiting the behavior or the character that we want around our family,
Mm,
then we don't need to spend time with them, or like we can limit the time that we're spending with them until they, not that they have to change for us, but if they want to be part of our family's life, then they have to make changes, at least around our family. Um, that's not to say that we're gonna exclude every single person from our life. You know, like I grew up with a messed up family, my mom's side. You know, like and this like issues within um,
sure.
my family, my parents, my siblings. You know, like um, there's always been issues there, but like, what does I guess like having that conversation with our kids too when they're old enough. You know, like because a person makes this choice doesn't mean that you know they're still loved by God, and so we need to
Right,
love them, but it doesn't mean that we necessarily accept their choices either.
right, right. That's well said. I think one of the areas of definitely one of the areas where I think this modern day culture that we're living in, and I'm hoping that it does turn for the better. But given the circumstances that we're living in, there's just very, very out there ideas and ideologies that are really driving a lot of you know influences and just issues perhaps that our children are being raised with, and they're kind of seeing and
Mm-hmm.
experiencing it. And be to your point about us being the light of the world and being called to be that for the world and being created for perhaps a time like this, like it's really up to us as parents to instill those kind of values,
Mm-hmm.
but not from a perspective of, hey, we're judging you, because
Right.
that's the worst thing that perhaps we could be doing, is never really judge ever, if so, and we're not really called to do that, but to show a better way forward, show a path forward through your actions, through your life, through the speech, right, the soundness of speech that you also have, to ensure that, you win people by having them see God through you. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's something that, will we have a tough challenge, especially for our generation, raising, children and future leaders for this country and
Right.
for the kingdom of God. My I want to just kind of ask a couple final thoughts here, right? So for for people that are listening in, right, that are not really as close to their faith, as perhaps haven't really explored a relationship with Christ, what are some of your words of encouragement that you could share for them that would, allow them to understand the you know the that there's it's really not strict rules or guidelines perhaps that, the words seem to say related to
Mm-hmm.
like the biblical roles and responsibilities of a marriage. um so I just wanted to know from your perspective, how can we ensure that they truly get the value of what the word is actually saying?
Yeah, I think, Bible gives us instructions for life, and we also have to realize that while it is still very relevant for today's world, it was written and translated quite a long time ago and in a different culture. So
Mm.
sometimes there are those strong words of like submissive that may have taken differently in
Mm.
ancient Greek culture, I believe it was. And so the Bible is still very living, it's very active. We can trust what the Bible says, even though it is quote unquote an ancient text. But
It's a
um,
living text, I will say.
it's a living text, yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Even
yeah.
though it was written long ago, like God wrote it in a way that He knew it would grow as the world grew, as culture changed, and I think God doesn't. He doesn't determine who we are or our worth to Him by what we've done or
Mm.
who we are currently. Like He always accepts us no matter who we are. Um, you know, we have so many stories in the Bible where people made mistakes. You
Yeah.
know, David, who was said to have a heart after God, was an adulterer. Like he
Right,
cheated
right.
on his wife. Like he killed someone because he got that wife pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And like he wasn't perfect, but
Mm.
God still considered him a man after his own heart. And we all fall short. None of us are perfect. Like we might have a Christian marriage, but like that doesn't mean that we are perfect to our husbands or our wives.
Right.
Um, yeah, Johnson and I have had our share of struggles and disagreements, and that's only multiplied by the fact that we grew up in very different cultures.
Sure.
And but it's when we come back together that we apologize, not just to each other but to God, and like realize where is our place in this marriage, why is this marriage important, and why does God call us to this marriage. And God doesn't give us these rules to kind of confine us or to keep us in this jail, so to speak. That's a strong word, but um I feel like sometimes that's kind of how marriage is portrayed, or like especially
Mm.
like if you're very independent and very like I want my way, is that
Right.
it's like this jail, especially as a woman, you're expected to submit to some man. Like, no, thank you. Um, and like especially, my, just thinking of going to India, like the women serve the men like all the time, and I'm just like I'm not like that, like but I don't think God means for us to do everything for our husbands or for our husbands to do everything for us. Like we still have our own responsibilities, and I think sometimes serving our husbands or our wives is a form of love and like
Mm.
a way of respect, yes. But God doesn't give us these rules or these instructions as a confinement or as a way
Right.
to be like a dictator, but more as a guide of like, hey, like not only are we to submit to our husbands and respect them, but our husbands are to treat us as Christ treated the church, like
Amen. Yeah.
that's a harder call than it is to submit to our husbands, right? Like that's a really high call, and like Christ was perfect. So like how is a husband supposed to be perfect and loving his wife? How is he
Mm,
supposed to love his wife as Christ loved the church? And so I think like for those who maybe are questioning or wondering like, man, like I don't know if I want to get married or if I don't know if I want to have this biblical marriage because I don't want to be stuck in this confinement or like this like I don't know, dictatorship in a way. Like I don't think it's like that, and I don't think God calls us to that. I think God calls us to be a team. I think God
yeah,
calls us to respect each other, to love each other as He loved us. Um, and you know, like I think that's one of the greatest joys. Like I won't lie, I was scared to get married. I didn't want to get
yeah,
married for a long time, and you know, I'd lived on my own for 12 years by the time I got married. I wasn't used to having to like conf- tell people what I was doing or like plan meals together or do this together. You know, like that was all foreign for me. But like also now like getting to live life together is one of my greatest joys, and like being able
mm,
to have someone that I know is always there for me, that's always gonna have my back. I didn't have that a lot growing up, and so
mm,
you know, and I was kind of in a situation before where Johnson was the one that realized like, hey, like you're not being treated fairly,
mm,
and I don't like how you're being treated, and I want to do something about it. And it took me a while to agree with him in that, but like I eventually had to realize like, no, Johnson's job is to take care of me.
mm,
Johnson's job is to make sure that I'm treated fairly, and well, I have to do my part as well. Like he's not being submissive to him isn't a sentence or a bad thing. Being
yeah,
submissive to him is trusting him because he loves me more than probably anyone else other than God, and allowing him to take care of me, allowing him to lead me
mm.
is more of a comfort, really, than,
Really, it's
you
like a
know,
burden
like,
off of your shoulders, right?
right, exactly. Like, I sometimes I feel bad because the burden that he has on his shoulders, I
Yeah,
feel like is so
yeah,
much greater as a
yeah.
man, as someone who is supposed to take care of me and my son and
Agreed.
his future child. Like, you know, and I see him carry it day in and day out. I see the stress on his shoulders. I see him awake in the middle of the night. And just like, yeah, like God doesn't call us to be stuck in this submissive behavior. I know that's the word that's used, but like to the point where we have to wait hand and foot, to the point where we're just, we don't have our independence, we don't have our own
Right.
lives, but He calls us to be partnership, to be,
Right.
to love each other as He loved us so that we can fulfill His calling in this world.
Yeah, I think, you know, for men, I don't think we can just get away with the fact of, oh, we're just called to just love our wife and leave it at that. But really, like, understanding the, to your point, the actual burden that you actually have and what the level of commitment that you need to be showing. Really, it's a wake up call for men, truly. Not just, you know, wives, right? Really, and I kind of hold myself accountable to that as well, right? Is ensuring that you're making sure you understand the value that, or excuse me, making sure you understand the responsibility that God has given unto you, and
Mm-hmm.
that first and foremost, your responsibility is to love Christ and to be in a fellowship and communion with Him. Number one, across, you know, the board. But the immediate next step, right, is first to your wife, right, and everything
Mm-hmm.
else will follow after that, right? Even there's this concept of, well, no, my children come. No, 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 no. That doesn't happen that way. It is Christ, your wife, your family, and everything else. And understanding that
Mm-hmm.
umbrella, or it's kind of generally depicted as an umbrella, where
Yeah.
Christ is the larger umbrella, and then
Mm-hmm.
husband, etc. But my point being, if you understand that concept, really you're called to be the priest to the family. And in order
Right.
to live a priestly life, you have to be able to understand what the word is saying and interpret it in a way that can be, um, you know, translated and you know, cascaded further to your children, of course your wife as well. So
Mm-hmm.
men, I kind of, all those listening in, I just wanted to give you guys a knock knock wake up call. It's time to make sure that you yourselves are ready to embrace this this responsibility, because it's important for our future children and just for the sake of this country to start driving towards the right direction and steering themselves to build around these fundamental pillars that we've been talking about, especially this one about honoring and a biblical marriage and the responsibilities and the roles that come with it. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to jump off my little soapbox there for all the men, but I appreciate your time, Heidi. It's been a pleasure having you on and being part of FFC Nation. Heidi, any parting thoughts?
Well, you put me on the spot there. Well, I think just, as we talked about marriage, just remembering that it's not, like as I was just saying, it's not a rule book or a dictatorship, but it's really just about being a partnership and submitting to God and trusting in God as a husband leads the wife, and the children as the wife helps and partners with her husband.
And there we have it, folks. Thank you again, Heidi. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you, you too.
But for all of our listeners, thank you all for joining in. You can find us at FFC Nation on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and of course, we have a website. You can find us at www.ffcnation.org.